My guest this week is Lisa Fancher. Lisa founded Frontier Records in Los Angeles, California in 1980, and the label is currently celebrating its 43rd anniversary. Frontier was one of the first independent labels to document the nascent LA and Orange County hardcore punk rock scenes before branching into other scenes such as the so-called Paisley Underground, goth, alt-country, and even pop. But they always had the focus on guitar-based bands, and some of the bands releasing records on Frontier included Circle Jerks, Adolescence, The Weirdos, TSOL, China White, Christian Death, Red Cross, Thin White Rope, Heat Miser, Young Fresh Fellows, Dharma Bums, American Music Club, The Long Riders, The 3 O'Clock, The Pontiac Brothers, Naked Prey Flop, and of course many more. And they're quickly closing in on their 100th release. It is my pleasure to welcome to Revolutions Per Movie, Lisa Fancher.
Hello, Chris, my old friend.
Are you ready to get in the pit with me?
I am ready. I learned how to do the slam dance from a guy named Brian during this movie, so now I'm ready to do the pit.
Oh my God, what a movie. We're going to talk about the punk rock hardcore documentary, Another State of Mind. But first, I wanted to ask you, with Frontier coming up on its anniversary, what was your gateway into punk?
My gateway was, gosh, it was so far back in the 70s, geez, I'm a senior citizen. But my gateway was honestly like television, Patti Smith. And even before that, I think the Dolls is a punk band, the Stooges are a punk band. But in terms of like hardcore, you started seeing hardcore, I would say 78, 79. It was like there was the art school wave of, the Weirdos and the Screamers. And those guys were even a little older than us. But then hardcore was just its own thing. And I started writing about it. I wrote for the New York Rocker, and I loved to go to the Cuckoo's Nest to see shows. And I described it to Andy Schwartz, and he was like, oh, that's cool. Go write about it. So, I met a lot of the people then, and I didn't interview that many people, but you'd stand around in the parking lot with kids. And I was always a stand in the back girl because I did not, those kids were wearing the steel-toed boots. It was not going to an X show where everybody had their vintage clothes on, sipping a beer. This was like, raucous and pretty dangerous, I would say.
I had the same experience where I was always in the back. I tried the slam dance once, and films like this have this mantra where you fall down, we'll pick you up, we're all there, it's a brotherhood, and then you just get demolished from some monsters.
You just get stomped, and I really admire girls that got into it because they're not wearing all the steel-toed boots and all this. When somebody jumps off the stage on you, it's like, I'm not getting my neck broken to watch some stupid band. So I just went in the back. Fair enough.
It's interesting because I feel like a lot more attention is given to kind of the art punk or, more traditional LA punk scene than some of the hardcore stuff, I feel.
It was like, maybe it wasn't as developed, but, the Adolescents were already banned. Middle Class had already put out a 45. Social Distortion probably started in 79, 80. They didn't have records out yet, but Posh Boy was already around. And I was lucky enough to either have friends. We were just crazy about going to shows in Huntington Beach. So we'd get in the car, like after work, we would go to Huntington Beach, get home like at dawn. This is when I was, I worked in a record store too, so nobody cared if you strolled in at noon. But we were just exhausted. And people played 2 sets then, which is unheard of now. But, play 2 sets. So just absolutely wiped out the next day.
I didn't know that. So TSOL or the Adolescents would play 2 sets.
Not necessarily. Maybe if you played the Whiskey or the Starwood, I believe, would require it. The Whiskey certainly did because they would turn the house over. Cuckoo's Nest, I can't remember. All I know is we just got home like, daylight approaching. By the time you eat and stuff, you're just like, another magic day at work. I had already dropped out of high school of pretending to go to college. So,
right. What was the catalyst to start Frontier then?
I just wanted to put out a record. I really liked this band called the Flyboys, and they weren't from OC. They were actually from the Pasadena area. And I just thought they were cool. They were very poppy. They weren't, super hardcore or didn't have a big message. Or I had missed the boat completely on the first wave. There was no financial way I could do the Screamers or anything. So the Danger House bands had pretty much come and gone. And so anyway, I just thought I'd give it a try. I came up with the idea after I got back from trying to live in London. And anyway, I saw the Flyboys a bunch. I liked them a lot. I just thought I'd put an EP out because I had already, I'd done fanzines, and it just seemed like a fun thing to do.
Was it an easy thing to figure out how to self-release something?
Probably easier for me than a lot of people because I worked for Greg Shaw and Susie Shaw at Bomb Records.
Right.
So I knew how, you have the graphic artist make a record cover and this is where you get it mastered. I pretty much, either glommed onto their credit or just used the people that they already used to do things. So, but it took me a solid, way over a year and a half to figure out how to, get the record out. I had to save up my paychecks, and it took a while to get so that came out in March 1980, which is why I call that the anniversary year. But I started the label, I don't know, probably late 78, but
Right.
no product till 1980. And then they broke up immediately. Like they came in to pick up their records and tell me they were no longer a band, as a band, which was cool. I mean, that was nice of them, but I was like, you got to be kidding me. So, we took out ads and Flipside, whatever. And it was just like, well, there's one for the books. And then I put out the Circle Jerks record, and everything fell together much more quickly. And I knew how to do the stuff. And the record came out within 3 or 4 months instead of a year and a half.
It's amazing to think how, I mean, bands were not made to last either.
In general, no.
Yeah, beautiful implosion. They all hated each other. They didn't know each other, and then they
Yeah.
move on. So,
Like the Germs is a perfect trajectory, and they can't really come back. Even if you're singing with the guy that was on ER, it was like live fast, die young kind of thing. And some of the bands are still around. The band, Youth Brigade and Social Distortion, still with us.
yeah, does that surprise you? I mean, did you ever imagine that, you know, 2023 there'd be a punk rock museum and all these legacy bands and a new
Yeah,
adolescence record and things like that?
punk rock bowling, and people come from all over the world to see vintage punk bands and like 2000 punk bands. Kind of amusing.
Yeah, I didn't see that happening. I
No,
really, I came into it a little, later than you, and it felt like it was already the last wave of American hardcore, was kind of shutting down already by the
yeah,
mid 80s. And bands like, Youth Brigade, who are featured heavily in this film, had changed their name to the Brigade. And, they'd chorus guitar pedals and they were trying to be more melodic and more REM ish. And
right.
it seemed like people were really kind of stepping away from loud, fast, angry.
Yeah, and then to me anyway, it didn't seem to bother anybody else. It seemed like everybody was super derivative. Like everybody picked their bands that they wanted to sound like.
Right.
I'm going to sound like the Misfits, and you're going to sound like the Adolescents, and they just kind of hodgepodged it together, and it was super derivative visually and musically. So I just wasn't that fired up on it. So I jumped off that bandwagon.
Yeah, it's a good bandwagon probably to jump off. You had a pretty
I had a good
amazing.
run.
Yeah, and your run with the label has continued, amazing, amazing bands that you've put out over the years, like Thin White Rope and Young Church
Yeah.
Fellows, and it just
Yeah, I got involved in the Northwest for a long time, and I'm very proud of those records just as much. They didn't sell so good, but they're musically just as good. But
absolutely.
yeah,
Well, let's get into this document, and I know we've connected on this film in the past, just in pure amazement of a document. Um, it's kind of a tragicomedy in a way.
yeah,
Just capturing the innocence of the hardcore movement and DIY and just the pitfalls that come from the reality of touring. The film was filmed in 1982, but Another State of Mind wasn't released until 1984. It was directed by Adam Smith and produced by Peter Stewart. And it's really weird. I was looking up some stuff about Adam Smith. He went on to direct and create a lot of Disney shows, and he co-created Mad TV,
whoa, one of my
and,
favorites.
and he wrote the screenplay for Pauly Shore's Son-in-Law.
Okay, well, maybe you should stick to directing, but
Yeah. So
wow,
so they basically they befriended
Sean
uh,
Stern,
Sean Stern
right?
from Youth Brigade and convinced them to follow them around. And they had their own rental truck, and they followed these two bands on tour, which were Social Distortion and Youth Brigade. And it was both their first major U.S. tour. And there are so many great quotes and moments in this film, especially when they're starting out. Sean says, punks are misunderstood. Most people think of punks as violent freaks, rolling around on glass, beating each other up. When I think about punk, I think about the pulse, the energy, the possibilities of change. That's what punks are all about. Change. I, I, I don't know.
It's just weird. Like, what? No, not really that much, but.
Well, I came into it through when the straight edge movement was really at its height. So,
Right.
Early 80s. And I was really drawn to it by that kind of attitude.
But here in LA, I shouldn't say this because it's mean, but I will. We used to take bets on when Mike Ness was going to die because he was such a bad junkie. Like, that guy was a mess. A lot of people they were just, terrible alcoholics. Keith Morris had to quit drinking. It was like, that was kind of just part of the scene, good or bad. It was not the Discord house at all. I think it was obviously a more affluent thing. I mean, I know that the Youth Brigade guys were certainly middle class. They were not squatters or anything. And that doesn't make you better or worse musically or anything. It was just where they were at. And Social Distortion, they were Orange County kids, and judging by all the complaining about money and stuff, I guess they were doing pretty okay, or the parents probably come from nice homes.
Did you have any association with BYO, their record label?
Not really, no, I don't think so. I was always friendly with those guys, and they were good guys, but I didn't really have any, it was almost like that was, even though LA's pretty contained, it was almost like they were a West Side type of a thing. And, but they played on every bill, so I saw them many, many times.
Yeah, one of the bills to raise money for this tour so they could buy a school bus and refurbish it was a show with TSOL, Adolescence, Wasted Youth, Youth Brigade, and I think there was like two other bands on the bill. Was that pretty typical, like a 6-band bill?
Yeah, I would say, yeah, they always, because people played really short sets, so, the Adolescents didn't even play half an hour and stuff, so 6 bands didn't really even take that long to cycle through. If you could find everybody and they hadn't gone off on a beer run or what have you, or if they showed up from OC. My question is, I wonder why they wanted a school bus, but I guess that makes sense because you could fit 11 people in a school bus.
I think it's a romantic notion too. We can't afford a tour bus, school bus.
Right.
Let's just trick it out and build bunks in it. But from the get-go, half the people involved, the crew and half of the band, kind of knew that things were not going to go very peacefully. And I think a member of Youth Brigade is saying, "Oh, I can't wait to see us fall apart. We're going to get on each other's nerves right away." Because at the time, it was difficult to tour at this time. Am I correct?
It is correct, because I can tell you for a fact, like the Circle Jerks did not tour. I put out Group Sex in like November 1980. There was no mechanism to tour. Maybe you could go to San Francisco or San Diego, but there was no, any infrastructure in the country to go play everywhere. So it had to be one of the first like hardcore tours, I would think, 82.
Yeah, I think, being on the West Coast, we got a lot of the SST bands would come through up and down. But anything, outside of that label or that group, Dead Kennedys, obviously.
Yeah.
But it was pretty quiet for a lot of these bands. Did not make it out.
There wasn't like college radio wasn't a thing. There was cool record stores in every town, but couldn't really put on a hardcore show in there without it getting annihilated. So good on them for booking a tour. I don't know if you found out this fun fact, but they start in San Francisco and then the next show is Seattle. They must have played Portland, right?
I think they say we're gonna play Portland and Seattle, but they don't show Portland. A lot of the shows are outside of California. They're really poorly attended, or they're getting pissed that they're getting paid in rolls of pennies.
Yeah.
And there's one guy who goes off on a promoter named Steve Pritchard Did you ever run into that? Do you know who they're talking about at all?
No, I never heard of that guy, but I'm guessing he either A, stayed in the business and was very successful, or he was, ridden out of town on a rail. But a lot of the crooks, were putting on shows years later.
Yeah, there's the pretty great Cuckoo's documentary about the Orange County scene,
Yeah.
the Cuckoo's Nest, and people are really divided on the
The
person
Jerry
who,
Roach thing, I was like,
yes,
you got to be kidding me. Like, what a good guy he was. I'm like, I don't know.
right.
Everybody, had a bad story about Jerry Roach and not getting paid and all that. And then he opened another club and then they went and played there. Safari something. Safari, I don't know what it's called.
Did you ever go on tour with any of your bands?
Not more than a show or two shows. I did a gang thing, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly with Thin White Rope and Naked Prey and the Pontiac Brothers. So I just drove to Phoenix with them just to make sure that the van was working. It was like two vans or whatever. And I was like, I'm making it really clear. This is it. Just going to this one. And even that was just like, a bunch of smelly boys, in a van. I'm sure it's really great, but I was like, couldn't fly home fast enough.
Wow.
Yeah, but it was fun. It was fun. Everybody's jovial, I would imagine, at the beginning.
Oh, absolutely,
And then
always. And
by the end, they're all bitter.
well, they start in August '82, and they're basically playing 31 cities, including 6 nights in Calgary, and they're going to do it in 5 weeks. And there was a network of people's floors to sleep on, and places to get food and get paid, and places to play, and opening bands to be on bills. But this bus idea they get immediately is the first thing that goes sideways in the film. It's constantly breaking down, and they have this I guess you would call him the father figure, the tour manager, this guy Monk, who we've talked about in the past. How if things are going badly, we're like, oh, where's Monk to fix this? Let's get him on this.
Yeah.
And he does his best, but they're having to throw all their money into this giant bus idea, and they're just starting to get hungry. There's the per diems are going down, and the film is really basically about the deterioration of social distortion, like imploding in this incarnation, and Youth Brigade trying to keep it together with a we're all in this together mentality. Even after that show where they got ripped off and they get paid in rolls of pennies, Sean's his quote is, "It was a very successful show, except for the fact that we got ripped off."
Right.
It's just like such genuine optimism. And also those two bands seem very different from each other in terms of how they want to roll with the idea of this tour.
Yeah, it's just a whole lot of it is attitude, obviously. Like, we're going to have fun no matter what, or if somebody shows up, we make a new fan. Had they only been able to see into the future that you could, sell T-shirts and bring records with you, but nothing like that had ever occurred to anyone, that you could sell things at a show.
I was talking to some people the other day, and we were trying to figure out when independent bands started bringing their own shirts to sell at venues, because I remember, like, if I went and see the Butthole Surfers, I would buy the shirts at a record store.
Yeah.
Or direct from the label. It wasn't like, I didn't feel like the bands were traveling around with a lot of merch.
There was no room. You couldn't even bring giant boxes of anything, I mean, you couldn't, there was no room. Like, everybody, like when Thin White Rope, there was usually 4 people in the band or whatever, and you couldn't bring boxes of stuff. There's just no place to even put it.
Yeah, I feel like it came in later.
I think it was more like the late 80s or
Yes.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know who would be first, but it wasn't then for sure.
Yeah, I just remember there not being merch tables.
Right.
And there was not people standing behind merch tables at Satyricon.
No. And then like when they got the idea, you'd have to rent like a U-Haul to put all the crap in, and then you'd be like, oh, we have some more room. We don't have to give up sleeping space or foot space for boxes of albums.
Right. There's a scene in Montreal where they try to go get some food late at night from a taxi stand, and the woman working there is totally freaked out by the punks and won't serve them, won't acknowledge them, calls the cops. They're all kicked out, which I remember that too. I remember people being scared of these they're not that tough looking, they're just kids wanting some coffee. Did you run into that a lot in LA with, like some prejudice against, the scene or people in it?
Not that I recall, but it was pretty insulated, like the Hollywood scene. Like, I don't know how they would react to people, but people had seen punks before or seen them on TV. So I don't think that was a big issue. But, I was thinking about that too in Montreal. I was like, Mike Ness has eye makeup on and they have black nail polish on. And uh, Derek usually had like pink or blue hair. So they're probably like, oh my God, they're just total murderers. They thought it was like, the Marlon Brando movie, with
Wild ones.
the wild ones, and they're just like, they just wanted to get something to eat. But she stood her ground. She was not serving those guys any coffee or anything and actually called the cops on them. So imagine if they had started breaking things.
Well, what about, were you at the LA punk riot, the Black Flag Ramones show?
There I wasn't at that one, but I was at the famous Elks Lodge riot, and then another time I was there. Black Flag and the Adolescents played the Santa Monica Civic, where the kids from OC, let's just face it, they caused lots of problems, and they broke like all the windows in the Santa Monica Civic. So the cops showed up. I mean, the bands did play, but um, the Elks Lodge riot, nobody was doing anything. This was old wave punks. It was like the Zeros, Go Go's, stuff like that. And the cops just went completely berserk, and nobody looked weird. Like, this was pre-hardcore. Nobody even looked weird, and the cops tried to break up every single show and would show up with the SWAT teams and stuff, and we'd just be like, "What is your problem?"
Yeah, we had that in Portland too. I remember unloading from a club in '85, and it was with a Poison Idea and
Mhm.
DRI, and there were police on horses, standing by, ready to go if anyone did anything wrong. And this was like '85.
I know, isn't that crazy?
Also, we had in the '80s, you had your Wally George, you had
Yes.
your Donahue, you had all these TV shows that were basically trying to understand punk. Like, they'd have a panel with like a couple punk rockers and then somebody who was deprogramming punk
Right.
rockers. And then they'd have a mother who was supportive, and then they'd talk to the audience. And rewatching those recently, it's kind of amazing how much hatred and misunderstanding there was directed to these kids.
Yeah, where they'd kick them out of the house completely, just throw them out of the house, and there was a is and was a lot of homeless punk rockers, because their parents just get what they were doing, and expected them to get a job and be normal and everything. So still a problem.
Yeah. This film originally, before it came out, there was a segment on it on IRS is the Cutting Edge.
Oh, I never saw that. I didn't know that.
Yeah, they interviewed the directors and they showed certain interviews and they showed the How to Pogo segment. But they intercut it with the Wally George interview. I mean, he did many shows about the dangers of punk rock, and I think like El Duce from the Mentors was on one of them, and
Yeah, of course.
that one of the kids in the movie was also on the Wally George thing, and he's the kid who's like, they want us to have 2.2 kids, a house, a
Oh,
job.
that guy.
The all American dream is just not viable, and he's just a kid. But then you have Keith Morris, who's kind of like the elder statesman in this film,
Right.
and he's saying the same thing. He's like, there's no family system. It's been falling down for about 20 years. Like sitting down to dinner, going to church. He's like, it's too fast a society now. That's done.
Right. But I don't know about you, but I didn't feel like those interviews with kids really added anything. It felt very decline of Western civilization. I was like, I know. But then I read, when I was looking for like fun facts, that the movie was too short, so they had to pad it. They had to add that stuff in later. So then I was like, oh, that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, they did a lot of interviews later. A lot of the footage was later. Anything that was a big show where they're showing
Yeah.
a massive pit, um, that was all shot in LA later.
Yeah, it had to be. Yeah, clearly it was not on the road. So
One of the most amazing scenes in it is the guy just showing you how to dance at a punk rock show.
I love that. That was fantastic.
What's his name, you said?
Brian. I
Brian.
don't remember seeing him at shows, but I'm sure he was there at everything at the cuckoo's nest because he had your classic OC look. Everything about him was screamed OC punk.
What would be the OC look?
They didn't really wear. It wasn't anything artsy. They would just be wearing like a t-shirt, not even with the logo necessarily. Sort of like I don't even know what they're called, like slacks, like golf pants, kind of things. More than jeans. Maybe they wear jeans, but it was just some ironic look. And then they were, they wore cardigans back in the day, but they
Right.
didn't necessarily all have, like the studs and the black leather jackets with studs. Some kids did, but they just kind of looked like kids. And then, of course, no long hair. That was like that would get you killed. Even shoulder length hair was not. Oh, there was so many shows where I would see one guy with long hair running for the exit because the entire audience was trying to murder the guy, and it's like he's at the show where he likes music like you do, but somebody just get a look at you, and I saw that a lot.
Well, and then how many years later is everyone just like wanting to look like Manson?
I know. Then they're all like, yeah, totally. Then they because the SST guys, it wasn't that long where they were growing their hair out and looked like Manson and stuff.
Well, this guy Brian does a pretty good job of getting you excited to go in the pit and get hurt.
Absolutely, because he's like a big, he's like a 6 foot strapping lad, and he's not going to get hit. And he's like, "Don't worry, your friends will pick you up." And like, "Oh yeah, no,
Yeah, and he shows you the pogo, the skank, and the slam dance, and he's talking about you just got to stay in the energy. The energy is in the beat. You got to stay as long as you're moving. It's in the beat. It's in the beat. And there's a pretty great montage of people stage diving to a youth brigade song. It's pretty awesome, but it's also fun to see how many boots actually connect with people's heads in the audience too.
yeah." It went straight from like Vans to steel-toed boots and the rags and the spikes and all that kind of stuff. But I want to say, me and the Circle Jerks need to take credit for. I always loved those '60s magazines where they would teach, like the Time Warp, they would teach you dance steps. So we put that on the Circle Jerks inner sleeve, like how to,
All right.
where you drink beer, you like do this, drink beer. And so yeah, that was already the Circle Jerks. The Skankin' guy was already the Circle Jerks logo, but we did a little primer on there for you to show how to do it properly.
Did you see like numbers going up of people knowing how to do it when that record came out? Like people just kind of aping it and being like,
It
"Oh,
took a while, but yeah, I would say there was some amount of it going on, but I couldn't even tell you who was the first person who started doing that. I'm sure somebody knows who that is, but
maybe it's
um,
Brian,
yeah, it could be Brian.
baby Brian."
It had to be an OC person, I'm
Yeah.
sure.
And there's even a really weird montage of these three kids practicing their stage dives in a pretty fancy looking swimming pool.
Yes, those kids in OC, I was like, I don't know if that's making a case for how down with the streets you are, because they were like cushy house. Laying out by the pool, chatting and everything.
Yeah, they looked pretty well taken care of.
Yes.
Meanwhile, this band's on tour and they're just like, if you're hungry, nobody's unified. You can't be fed on unity.
I
It's like,
remember Dennis Danel's like, I lost 6 pounds. And I'd be like, I'd pay money to go on tour and lose 6 or more pounds. But anyway,
yeah,
he was a little dude. I saw those guys when they were little kids shopping at the Capitol Meet, the famous Capitol Meet where people would go after shows. And he had to have been, I don't know, 14 or 15 buying punk records and stuff. So,
yeah. These bands, they were teenagers, right?
yeah,
So kids out on tour.
barely 20, if that, like, maybe Mike, I don't know how old he is, but barely 20 years old. So what a fun thing to do, even if you run out of money and gas, I guess, not having done it. Seems like fun.
It's There's an energy in the film that is kind of lovely. It does make you want to go out and do it. But I think the filmmakers also had to show the shit too, because it's a documentary. You need some
Yeah.
tragedy, and as the tour keeps going on, it just gets worse and worse for them.
You just turn on each other like Big Brother, you just like, oh, they drive me crazy. They're always complaining. And the one guy would get his, Derek again, would get his hair dyed. I need it black because things are going so bad. I'm going to dye my hair black. I mean, unintentional laughter is like, really? That's the worst thing you can think of to do is dye your hair black? And you'd always get somebody else to do it too.
Yeah, totally.
Some girl in a bathtub or some guy with his rubber gloves tying the guy's hair. I was like, come on.
Yeah, he says at one point, she was no Mohawk Mania chick. And I was like, what are you?
What?
I know that's some sort of code with the crew about something, but like a Mohawk Mania chick, I was like, wow.
Yeah, that wasn't in there was some super un PC stuff, but there was some
Yeah.
un PC girl talk in the bus that was, I'm sure it happens in every touring bus with 11 guys with nothing to do.
Even if your band is, all about unity, it doesn't mean everybody in the audience is.
Yeah.
So, what other things resonate in the movie from you? Do you have favorite scenes or?
I liked the kids that they talked to actually on the street at the shows. I let again the Calgary thing where they served them homemade chili, and that was sort of like a minor Discord house, or maybe not so minor, but took in the people and fed them. Um, Detroit was kind of when things were really going south. But I was going to say, if I was making a movie about my own band, just because it's it's mostly a BYO Youth Brigade thing, Social Distortion, we're along for the ride. But when you put Minor Threat in your movie, wow, they just blew both bands away. They're
I
so good.
know.
In that Baltimore show, Ian's mic isn't working, so like the crowd singing. So they already had their whole thing solidified, had it going on, and it kind of makes them look like a bunch of little crybaby. And then they put up both band, what's left of both bands anyway. They
Right.
let them stay at the Discord house. But I love the sign "No Girls Allowed" like it was the Little Rascals. But because I don't know, I'm sure you're not allowed to do anything Discord, that the Discord guys didn't do. So where did they do with the cigarettes? They have to go walk, 10 yards away from the house to smoke and drink beers and
Yeah, they stayed
whatever
with
else.
him for quite a while.
Quite a while because that bus was a mess by then. That thing did not work at all.
No, and that's basically where everything falls apart. The band splinters throughout the tour. Some people are flying home that are like, tour management or helping, roading.
Yeah,
But by this point, people are like, "What's the point? There's
yeah.
nothing we can do." You were talking about the Calgary thing where they brought people in. I found one of the interesting things, and I wanted to ask you if there was something like this in LA, where there was this PUNX house, Patriots of Jesus Christ in New York City,
Oh, I saw that.
where they're like, "Hey, stay here. You're punk. You could stay with a bunch of punks, but we're gonna bring you the power of Christ. But here, you eat your food and have a place to sleep."
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And they cut to these kids singing these hymns, and they look pretty miserable. They look like they're just being held hostage by a cult.
I was gonna say I would have to be there. I never heard of anything like that in LA or OC. But you'd have to be pretty hungry for me anyway to listen to somebody read the Bible at me.
Yeah,
I'd just go panhandle with a cardboard sign or something because I'll be like, it's not worth it.
yeah. Even the guy who's preaching says, "Punk rock music does not bring God much glory," and it's like,
I know they're doing it anyway. They're like, did you listen to the lyrics or whatever? They weren't terribly judgy. I mean, it was nice, but so that was a really interesting scene because I mean, you have to include it in the movie, but wow.
yeah, agreed. I think all this stuff was kind of shot later, because they just didn't have enough footage or enough of a tour
Right.
to document. Um,
And it was crazy how much gear they had because as people are leaving and, most of Social Distortion is gone. It is, I thought it was really cool seeing Mike Ness writing Another State of Mind, the song.
that's incredible.
Because whenever you see a movie, like the song's already written, everybody plays in the studio at the same time. Like it's just fully written lyrics and everything. And he's actually working on it, like gradually coming up with stuff. And it gave the movie a title that it probably didn't have.
It's a great song too,
Yeah.
and it sounds really kind of lovely on acoustic guitar.
Yeah, it worked.
It's really melodic and melancholy, and that's a great scene because earlier he's just kind of talking about what a doofus he is.
Right.
He's like, I wrote down all the TV shows he watches. So he's like, I get up, I wake up, watch Twilight Zone, eat, General Hospital, then Rockford, and he's just laughing the whole time at how absurd it is. He just goes like Mary Tyler Moore, Bob Newhart, SWAT, Kung Fu. Then I go out, drink with my friends, go out with my friends, nightlife.
Right.
But it's just like it reminded me of faking sick, on a school day and just like being in front of the television and watching all this stuff just
Yep.
go by.
And when you're Mike Ness, you're not really like day job material, so good on them if you got something out of Rockford Files that you can use or whatever. And it reminds me of the Red Cross guys too. They just watch TV like they're like a sponge of, TV stuff.
I never expected Social Distortion to be a gold record
Absolutely.
band that just would be for the masses. Didn't see that coming at all.
Wouldn't have expected Mike to live this long. He's extreme. I mean, good on him. I mean, he's extremely wealthy, has, tons of houses in OC, and they can make like a year's salary playing House of Blues they play like at Christmas. I don't know if they still do that, but they did.
Right.
Tickets were crazy priced, and they play like a week and make, ungodly tons of money. So good for Mike. He pulled it off after all this. And he seemed like he had the best attitude. He wasn't going home. He was in it to win it.
That's good. It's good to hear. I feel like with punk, there's kind of a stigma that you can't succeed or make money off something
Mm-hmm.
or you're a sellout. There's been a lot of, complaints about this punk rock museum that opened in Vegas
Right.
and these tours that are happening. I mean, I'm trying. Devo tickets are $90 right
I know. Isn't
now.
that crazy?
I don't know.
They probably could have played a month too, even at $90.
Yeah, totally. And there's a part of me that's like, they deserve it. They're
Yeah.
here. They laid the groundwork, and it's a band. It's just whatever.
They're still
Um,
kicking around and everything. Like, I don't know why the tickets are that much, but everything, all shows are ridiculously expensive. So,
when I was younger, bands could be accused of selling out.
right.
And punk bands did get accused of that. I remember even certain Circle Jerk records, people are like, not as intense or,
Yeah, I know. This one's metal. They sold out, but you look at Green Day and Jawbreaker are very popular, but they never had giant hits. But um, relatively did them on their own terms and everything like that. But after you've slept on a million floors and made no money for 10 years, and you signed to a major, can't really fault people for that.
don't buy the record.
Yeah, exactly. If they're too big for you and everything, and they're too sellouty for you,
Well, there's footage of Ian working at a Haagen-Dazs, scooping ice cream in this film.
yeah, him and Hank used to work at the Haagen Dazs in DC.
It was amazing to see it. I'd forgotten it was in it. Reading about it in books and everything just to see
Right.
Ian with an apron on, um, scooping up stuff.
Just as long as it's not beer, you can have it.
Oh my gosh! So as the film comes to a conclusion, Monk and Brett and Sean Stern, they spend over 30 hours coming back in a windowless U-Haul truck.
Yep. Packed in the back. They could have been dead and nobody would have even known.
I know. I think about that, like air and darkness, the heat. Oh, youth is awesome.
They must have just hammered on the sides of the van, be like, let me breathe for a minute.
I know. And they get out. So, when that guy Derek's complaining about the 6 pounds, I'm like, hey,
Come on.
you had no sensory deprivation like
Right.
these poor guys. But, I think, again, at the end, Sean is like, he's asked, how do you think it went? He's like, was it a dismal failure? Was it worth it? Yeah. He seemed like we set out what we wanted to do.
Yeah.
We set out to do a tour. We made it ourselves, mostly playing all ages places, meeting the kids, meeting other bands. And it was a success.
Yeah. And you see if they have what it takes to make it. And honestly, if you weed out the people that are going to whine about everything the whole way,
There's a lot of whining.
there's so much complaining. God. Like, why are you in a band if you're just going to complain about everything? Sheesh.
Well,
Until you're famous, you're going to eat a lot of, PBJs or cheese pizza, if they even give you anything at a club.
no, I mean, one of the shows, they didn't even open the door to them. They're like, we're not having this show.
Yeah, I know.
It's not happening.
Can you
which
imagine?
I remember happening quite a bit.
Pre-self, remember when, then people learned to check in first, like, we didn't even know your tour agent said you were playing here, we're closed, whatever it is. That even happened with every band I had. They would be like, we didn't know you were coming here.
And a lot of people would just put on shows themselves. They'd rent out a hall,
Yeah. Yep.
and they'd rent out a PA, and there'd be like two local punk rock kids who were really excited to put it on. And then the venue would look at it and be like, no, no way. We're not letting you play here.
Yeah.
And I just remember so many shows just getting to the door of something and be like, what? It's like at some music union hall.
Right. Or finding out you're playing with a cover, Leonard Skinner cover, every gamut of stupidity that can happen to people. But you don't all get that on a documentary crew, all the ridiculous things.
No, I mean, he had to save his energy for writing Son in Law with Pauly Shore.
That's right.
So,
I heard that the guy that made the poster went on to be a fancy art designer, like at an ad agency. I was reading about it, doing a little reading about everybody. And I always thought the poster was really cool. I have two very sad nuggets, which is that Dennis and Derek are both dead from Social Distortion.
okay.
And Dennis was pretty young. That was right around 2000. But Derek says something about I'm old, I'm 38. Obviously, it was a joke, but he died when he was 38. Weird.
Yeah, I was watching some of the commentary with Mike Ness, and that was one of the first things he
Yeah.
brought up. He was watching, it's like, it's weird. He keeps lying about his age 3 different times, and then he says, I'm 38.
Right.
That's when he died.
That's when he died.
So.
I think it wasn't that long ago, really, because the Adolescents, I think he had a little studio and the Adolescents had recorded demos or something with him. So it wasn't a super long time ago that he died. So when I originally saw Another State of Mind, your brother and I we had all these lines from the movie that we love, and we'd scream, "Where's Monk?" and things like that. But it was actually kind of sad. Like when I saw it this time, I was expecting it to be super funny like it was to me. And it was much more, it was like a more somber experience. I can't explain why, but
Yeah, I agree.
just watching that wheels fall right off that bus, and nobody got hurt or anything, but learning who your band members are and all that, it was a little more grown up to watch it, and it wasn't just ridiculous.
I agree. I feel like it's just more real, than when you're younger and you haven't done it yet.
Right.
Our band with my brother and Jim, who was in the Dharma Bums,
Mm-hmm.
watched that film to just watch kind of the absurdity of how to do it wrong. And our tour was way worse than their tour because we borrowed Elliott Smith lent us the Heat Miser van, or we rented it from them.
Which I bought for them, and it was a giant piece of shit, but I had nothing to do with picking the van out.
Yeah, the horn got stuck. 3 tires went out. We broke an axle driving into Austin, snapped off. And then in Salt Lake City, the lights went out. And that's when Jim started kicking the side of the van apart. And I really thought maybe I'll never see Jim again after this tour. He may never talk to me. But we watched this film as kind of a like,
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, like, look at these punk rockers doing it wrong. And then it was just like, oh yeah. We played Corpus Christi.
Oh no.
They didn't know we were on the bill. We showed up, they were like, oh, we didn't know we had music tonight. We set up, we played to no one, and we just put it down, and then we left. It was like, I don't know what we were thinking. I don't know why we thought we still had to play. But that's youth.
Should have been like, we get a night off. But yeah, when you go all that way, you just want to play.
But it's also that thing we were kind of doing like them. We were like, we're in a band. That's what you do. You play and you tough it out. I think we were just embarrassed that this is probably a much more universal situation than we thought.
Absolutely.
And we were just being naive, not really having done it like that. So
you really want a tour manager so that he or she will be the fall guy. And that happens. Or what do you mean they didn't know we were coming? That'll be someone's fault.
Yeah, I can't even believe people want to do that job still. It seems so thankless.
Thankless. Absolutely thankless task completely.
Oh my gosh. Was there anything that you would have liked to have seen the film address or done differently?
I don't know. I mean, you just have what you have to work with, It's like sometimes you get gold like Dig, and there's just crazy shit happening all the time, and other times it's not that interesting. Probably can't always film the guys. I don't know if they got in crazy slapping fights, or they didn't seem like they were having a lot of fun even from the beginning. They seemed kind of serious, but I gotta think that there was foolishness happening or some laughs. But
Yeah, it seems like it. I mean, I think early on there's a lot more mugging and goofing
right.
around, but they do seem pretty wiped, and they do seem pretty beaten
Yeah.
down.
Yeah. When the shows don't go, they don't validate that you're doing this. It's got to be rough. But nevertheless, you're breaking ground there if you're touring in 82. It easier for other people to tour.
Yeah, and probably that was not apparent at all. I mean, there was no way to know that that was the truth.
Mhm.
It was probably like, why are we doing this?
Maybe it's time for a director's cut with all the footage.
Isn't BYO still around as an organization?
I'm not sure. I know that a little insider baseball. Sean is completely in charge of punk rock bowling at this time, and he's not doing business with his brothers. They all, I don't know if he got paid off or bought out or get it, but anyway, he's running punk rock bowling on his own.
Oh, that's amazing. I didn't know that.
So I don't know if BYO exists. I'm honestly
Okay.
not sure.
Well, what two bands touring in a school bus would you pick to have a documentary be made about?
Wow, that I would have wanted to see. Probably, I'd always want to see Red Cross because they're ridiculous, and then um, I don't know, like Vicious Circle because they were just the most violent, dangerous people in the world, and then see what happens.
Who were Vicious Circle?
They were an OC. It was more of a gang than music. I don't even know if they recorded or if they have one track on something. It was like Jack from TSOL, and they basically existed just to fight. That would be a cool tour bus thing, but like actual music from that era, like early '80s stuff. I mean, I would always say the Minutemen should have had their own documentary, other than stuff after the fact. But
Right.
then we're gonna get sad if we start talking about the Minutemen.
Well, how did Red Cross get a pass with, being early adopters of like long hair and glam in that scene?
Nobody seemed to mind because they had started so early. They were one of the very first punk bands I ever saw. Steve
Right.
was 12 or something. So at that, I wouldn't say they had like buzz cuts, but they had shortish hair. And then when they decided, when Black Flag made it okay to have long hair, and then they all sort of had long hair. Nobody didn't bother anyone.
Okay. I always wondered, and it's true, I guess everyone saw them grow up.
Yeah, exactly. They might, obviously their heroes had long hair. So then they're just like, why are we putting on this facade that we're part of that scene when they were just sort of their own island?
Right.
Actually, someone is making a Red Cross documentary because I was interviewed for it, and I'm not sure what the status of it is, but that should be amazing because there's lots of footage.
Oh, that'd be incredible. Well, you've put out so many records that are just in my heart and skull, and I think a lot of people would say that. And just listing off the bands that you've worked with and the different styles of music, and you just have had an amazing ear for unique. I don't know. They're not weirdo bands, but they're definitely different. And I think
Yeah.
Frontier definitely has a shape to it that a lot of labels don't.
We never had a hit record, so it's a blessing or a curse.
Right.
I mean, Institutionalized did okay, but I never had to worry about, I don't know, like labels like TVT, they just exploded. They had like one hit record and got taken
Right.
over and blah, blah, blah. Never had to worry about that. There's been so many of those TK and stuff, it's like never had the opportunity to sell in. So
Right.
here we are.
Well, at the end of every interview, I ask people on a scale from 1 to 10 what they thought of the movie, and I grade it differently every time. And this time I want to ask on a scale from 1 to 10, of 1 being the weakest and 10 being the most excellent, how many earnest songs about unity would you give it on a scale from 1 to 10?
I'd give it a 7.5.
I think that seems really fair.
Yeah.
And if we stick together and we pool our resources, we can get a bus and we can tour on this movie.
As long as you can locate Monk so you can fix the timing gears. So,
Monk and Brian.
Can you imagine pushing a bus around in DC traffic now? They would just arrest you on the spot for even trying such a thing.
Yeah. And I'm surprised they just didn't yell at the camera people to be like, put down the camera.
Yeah.
Help us.
Yeah, yeah,
We're
yeah.
dying here.
I know. Why are you filming this? But everyone should see it because it'll get your DI. It'll make you want to form a band and go on tour.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Lisa.
I'll see you around.
Definitely. Thank you for listening to Revolutions Per Movie. We release new episodes every Thursday, so be sure to search for the show on your favorite podcast app and subscribe to the show. And if you've enjoyed this, it would mean a lot to me if you would rate and review it as well. You can follow us on social media at Revolutions Per Movie, and also find out more information about our various guests in the episode show notes. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week. Bye!